Tonight, we drift across oceans of memory, through smoke, railways, and the quiet ache of time. Our story follows Liang Chen, a young man from Shanghai who leaves home during the age of empire, to build a railroad in a land of gold that offers none. He crosses mountains that bury his friends, and oceans that carry ghosts instead of fortune. But even when the noise of the world grows louder, the river of his childhood still whispers his name. Through famine and fire, letters and loss, his life becomes a bridge between two worlds, China's fading past and the restless promise of the new century. And as the world changes around him, Liang Chen learns what endures beyond empires, beyond war, and beyond distance itself. The quiet, unbroken rhythm of home. Soft pause, sound of water deepens. Close your eyes. Let the river carry you. This is the river that dreamed of home. A snoozy tour sleep story. The river outside my window used to carry the scent of lotus and rain. Now it smells of coal, iron, and strangers' smoke. Every morning before dawn, I push a wooden cart along the docks of Shanghai, the boards still slick with mist. Ships taller than temples crowd the harbor. British clippers with silver hulls, Dutch brigs painted in blues and reds, even the rare American steamer breathing clouds into the gray sky. I used to think the sea ended where our country began. Now I'm not so sure. I am 17, old enough to feel tired, too young to be anything but a shadow among other shadows. My cart is filled with wooden crates marked in a language I cannot read. Sometimes I wonder what's inside: tea, silk, opium, maybe all three tangled together like fate itself. But questions are dangerous here. Move quickly, boy, the foreman snaps, and I obey, shoulders aching beneath the weight of another man's world. When I stop to breathe, I watch the foreign sailors laugh, their teeth bright as coins. They call to each other in words sharp and musical. I try to catch their meaning, but it slips past like fish beneath muddy water. Still I listen. Every day I learn a little more. Language, they say, is power, and I am tired of being powerless. Do you ever listen to voices you can't understand, hoping one day they'll make sense? Do you ever stand between two worlds, wondering which will claim you first? At home the air changes. Our street is narrow, hung with lanterns that flicker in the river wind. My mother waits with a bowl of congee, my father waits with his pipe. He wasn't always like this. Once he made furniture for the scholars' houses, carving dragons so fine their scales seemed to breathe. Then came the cheap chairs from England, made by machines faster than hands. His workshop emptied, his spirit dimmed, and one day the pipe replaced the chisel. I still remember the first time I smelled the opium smoke. It was sweet, almost gentle, like mercy disguised as poison. Sometimes, when he sleeps with the pipe still glowing, I wonder if he dreams of the world before the treaties. A world where Chinese ships ruled these waters, where foreign faces were curiosities, not masters. But dreams are like smoke too. They rise, twist, and vanish. At the docks, there's a foreign merchant who always stands apart from the rest. Tall, pale, his eyes the color of the morning tide. He watches everything with the calm of someone who owns it. Once he caught me staring and said in broken Chinese, "You learn quick, boy?" I nodded. He tossed me a copper coin and pointed to the crates. "Work hard. Maybe England good to you." England? Another word for somewhere else, somewhere unreachable. That night, I held the coin in my palm until it warmed. It smelled of salt and metal, like every promise ever made to the poor. I thought of how the foreigners walked through our streets with boots that never touched the mud, and I asked myself, what would it take to walk like that? The river keeps moving though it's dying. Its banks crumble where warehouses rise. Its fish grow thin where gunboats anchor. And yet, when the moon floats on the water, it still looks beautiful. Maybe beauty doesn't die, it just changes shape until we no longer recognize it. Do you hear the river too when you close your eyes? The creak of boats, the whisper of ropes, the faraway hum of a world growing larger than anyone asked for. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear it breathing, a slow, endless rhythm like sleep. The foreigner's name, I later learned, was Mr. Blackstone. He carried maps wherever he went, long rolls of parchment smelling faintly of seawater and ink. To him, the world existed only as lines, colors, and borders waiting to be drawn. He spoke little Chinese but always found someone to translate for him. When his usual translator fell ill, he pointed to me. "You boy. You listen good," he said, tapping his ear. And just like that, I began to follow him through a city that no longer felt like mine. We visited warehouses filled with goods I could not afford to touch. ivory, porcelain, sacks of tea tied in red string. Everywhere we went, Blackstone's maps came out first. He spread them across tables, tracing rivers with his finger, marking new boundaries. British concession. French concession, he would murmur. Each word a quiet claim. Each mark another cut across China's skin. Once, as he studied the paper under a lantern, I asked him softly, "Why do you draw these lines, sir?" He looked surprised. "Because someone must decide what belongs to whom," he said, then smiled. "But what if it already belongs to someone?" I asked. He laughed, a gentle sound that somehow chilled me more than anger would have. "Then they should have protected it." The maps showed streets that hadn't yet been built, churches that hadn't yet been blessed, and gardens that would one day bloom under flags not our own. When I carried his satchel, I sometimes peeked inside. Among the scrolls was a small compass made of brass, its needle trembling as if alive. I thought of my father's chisel, how it once shaped wood into art, and realized how different tools could carve destinies. His made chairs. Blackstone's made empires. Do you ever wonder when the world decided to belong to the loudest voices? When drawing a line on a map became the same as owning everything within it. One afternoon, we stopped at a tea house that had once belonged to a Chinese merchant. Now a sign hung above the door in English, "For Europeans only." Blackstone entered without hesitation. I followed a few steps behind, unsure if I was permitted. The waiter, a nervous young man with bound feet and cloth shoes, hesitated until Blackstone gestured. "It's all right," he said in slow Chinese. "He works for me." That was me. I sat in the corner, invisible except when needed. Blackstone unrolled another map while sipping tea from a porcelain cup that had probably been made by my father's friends. He was planning a warehouse near the harbor, a district fit for gentlemen. His pencil moved like a blade, slicing our city into zones of ownership. When he finished, he leaned back and said almost kindly, "Someday Shanghai will be the jewel of the East. A place where everyone can prosper, if they know their place." I wanted to ask which place was mine, but I already knew the answer. That night, walking home, I traced the route we had taken on the docks. The streets glowed under new gas lamps, casting long shadows across the old wooden houses. A missionary passed, handing out papers about salvation. Behind him, a beggar coughed blood into the gutter. Two men of different worlds, sharing the same street, never seeing each other. Maybe that was what the maps were really for, to make sure no one ever had to. When I reached the river, I sat on a crate and opened my hands. The calluses from hauling cargo had hardened. The ink from Blackstone's maps stained the edges of my nails. It looked as if the borders had already begun to mark me too. The moon hung low, half hidden by smoke from steamships. It looked like a coin, one side bright, one side shadowed, a perfect symbol for the world I was living in. Do you think maps ever bleed when the lines they carry cut too deep? Do you think those who draw them ever dream of the faces they erase? I stayed there until the tide rose, listening to the water lap against the dock. The city behind me hummed like a restless machine. And for a moment, I imagined tearing every map to shreds, letting the wind scatter them like ashes. So the river at least could remember what freedom felt like. But when the first horn sounded from the harbor, I stood, brushed the dust from my shirt, and walked back into the maze of lights. Tomorrow Mr. Blackstone would need me again, and I would carry his maps as carefully as if they were the beating heart of the world. By the time I return from the docks, night has already draped itself over the city like a torn silk robe. The streets shimmer with puddles, reflecting lanterns that tremble in the wind. I walk slower now, not from weariness, but because I dread the moment the road ends. Home used to mean comfort. Now it means remembering what we've lost. Our house is small, 2 rooms built from wood darkened by smoke and years. The scent of opium lingers before I even open the door. Inside, the air hangs thick, heavy, sweet, almost merciful. My father sits by the window, a thin figure outlined by the flicker of an oil lamp. The pipe rests between his fingers like an extension of his bones. He doesn't look up when I enter. He rarely does. "Father," I whisper. The only answer is the faint crackle of burning resin. Beside him, a bowl of ashes. Once, those ashes came from his workshop fire, the remains of wood carved into beauty. Now they are all that's left of his waking hours. My mother, thin as paper, moves quietly around him, refilling the lamp, straightening the mat. She never scolds anymore. Silence has become her only weapon against despair. When she sees me, she manages a small smile. "Eat," she says, handing me a bowl of rice with bits of pickled radish. I eat slowly, pretending not to notice the tremor in her hands. Do you know what it's like to watch someone vanish while still breathing? To speak to them and realize your words can no longer find them? When I was younger, Father would tell stories while carving, tales of dragons and emperors, of rivers that could sing. His hands would dance across the wood, shaping something from nothing. Now those same hands only tremble, the pipe rocking slightly with each shallow breath. The light in his eyes, once sharp and alive, flickers like a dying ember. "Foreign wood," he muttered once when I was still a child. "They cut it faster than we can dream." At the time, I didn't understand. Now, every foreign crate I carry feels like a coffin built for our own craft. Progress, they call it. But I wonder, progress for whom? After dinner, I sit outside the doorway, the river wind brushing against my face. From here, I can still hear the city breathing, the laughter from the British clubs, the bells of a missionary church, the distant rhythm of hammers building the new concession roads. All these sounds mix into something strange, almost like a song that doesn't belong to any of us. Inside, my father coughs. The sound is wet and deep. My mother rushes to his side, whispering something I can't make out. Then comes silence again, the kind that fills even the smallest room until it feels endless. I stare up at the moon, the same moon the foreigners must see from their grand houses by the Bund. It looks no different, and yet it must shine differently upon them. Perhaps that's what power is, to look at the same sky but believe it was made for you. Do you ever wish you could freeze time, just for a moment, before everything you love becomes something else? Do you think the world would forgive us if we stopped moving forward? I close my eyes and remember the smell of wood dust in my father's shop. How his laughter used to echo off the beams. He would say, "Each piece of wood has a soul. You only have to listen." Now I listen, but all I hear is the faint hiss of opium smoke and the river beyond, whispering of distant lands. Before I sleep, Mother touches my arm. "Tomorrow," she says softly, "the Englishman still needs you?" "Yes," I answer. She nods, her eyes distant. "Earn what you can," she murmurs. "But don't lose yourself in their world." I promise her I won't, though I'm not sure what myself even means anymore. Perhaps it's the sound of my father's carving knife, now silent. Perhaps it's the scent of lotus that used to float down the river before coal and smoke devoured it. Or perhaps it's something I'll only find by leaving. As I lie down, the lamp dims. Father exhales one last curl of smoke, his head slumping forward. For a moment, he looks peaceful, as if the poison he breathes has become the only comfort left to him. And I wonder, as sleep drifts near, whether the rest of us are really so different. We each have our pipe, work, money, dreams, and we inhale until the world feels lighter. The night hums with distant thunder. The river murmurs. Somewhere, another ship departs for a foreign shore. And beneath all that sound, I hear my mother's quiet prayer. For him, for me, for a China fading like smoke above the dying river. It began with whispers carried by the wind. At first, I thought they were just another story, like the ghost tales sailors tell to make the night shorter. But soon the whispers took shape, names and purpose. Someone in the south, they said, was calling himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ. Someone who wanted to drive out the Manchus, end the corruption, and free China from the foreign devils who now filled our ports. I heard it first in the marketplace. A peddler selling dried fish leaned close and whispered, "They call him Hong Xiuquan. He says heaven has chosen him." Another man spat into the dust. Every few years, someone claims heaven's favor. They rise, they fall, and the rest of us pay the price. But the first man's eyes shone with something dangerous, hope. Hope spreads faster than any plague. Within days, the rumors had reached the docks. Workers murmured about armies forming in the south, villages joining the cause, banners with strange crosses flying above them. They said Hong promised a new world. No opium, no taxes, no foreign masters. Even men too tired to dream began to listen. I tried not to. After all, I had seen what dreams cost. My father's pipe, my mother's silence, my own back bent beneath foreign crates. These were the price of believing the world could change. And yet, as I carried cargo through the rain, I found myself wondering, what if this time was different? What if heaven truly spoke through this man from the south? That evening, I found my cousin Wei in a tea shop near the river. He was reading an English newspaper, his brows furrowed. "Wei," I said quietly. You've heard about the rebellion? He glanced up, sighing. Everyone has. The foreigners call it madness. The Qing call it treason. And the poor call it salvation. He folded the paper and lowered his voice. Hong Xiuquan says God gave him a sword of flame. He wants to build a heavenly kingdom. I laughed softly, though my heart wasn't in it. A heavenly kingdom in China? Wei shrugged. Maybe that's what we need. The empire is dying, Liang. It can't even defend itself anymore. Do you believe a man can change the fate of millions? Or do you think fate only laughs at those who try? The tea shop buzzed with quiet talk. Men arguing softly, some excited, some afraid. One said the rebels forbade foot binding and gambling. Another claimed they burned idols and temples, calling them false gods. A third whispered that women could fight beside men in their army. To the old, this was madness. To the young, it was freedom. Outside, thunder rolled across the Huangpu River, shaking the shutters. The storm felt like an omen. Rain poured down, and the street became a mirror for the lantern light. In that trembling reflection, I saw two worlds, the old, fading and cracked, and the new, still forming but uncertain. When I returned home, my mother was mending an old robe. Her hands were steady, her voice low. There's talk of fighting, she said. I nodded. It's spreading fast. She didn't look up. Fighting always spreads faster than peace. After a long pause, she added, if they reach here, promise me you'll keep your head down. We can't afford to lose you too. Her words lingered long after I lay down. Through the thin walls, I heard my father's cough and the soft rattle of his pipe. Outside, the rain continued relentless. Somewhere beyond the city, men were marching, believing they carried heaven's fire in their hearts. And I was just a dock worker caught between gods and gunboats. Sleep came slowly. In my dreams, I stood before a great river wider than the ocean, its waters glowing red beneath a stormy sky. On one shore stood soldiers in western coats, on the other, peasants in rags. In the middle, a single man lifted a burning sword, his voice echoing like thunder. The old world must drown for the new to rise. When I woke, I could still smell smoke. Do you ever wake from a dream so vivid you're not sure which world you belong to? Do you ever feel history brushing against your skin, like a tide you can neither resist nor escape? The next morning, the harbor was unusually quiet. Even the gulls seemed uncertain, circling above the masts without calling. Men worked slower. Women whispered in doorways. The air itself felt heavy, like the moment before rain. The city waited, for what no one could say. But we all felt it coming. The docks smelled of salt, tar, and sweat. Ships from every corner of the world crowded the harbor, their flags snapping in the wind. On mornings like this, the city felt alive, a breathing beast made of wood and iron. But beneath that pulse there was something else too. Restlessness, a hunger for escape. That was when Wei found me again, his face flushed from excitement. The agent is here, he whispered. They're hiring for America. I stared at him, unsure if I had heard correctly. America? He nodded. Railroads. 2-year contract. Good pay. Food, lodging, even money sent home. He said it like a prayer. A promise shaped in silver. We stood beside a line of men waiting outside a low warehouse marked recruitment office. Oversee labor. Most were like me, young, tired, worn thin by years of bad harvests and foreign wages. Some carried small bundles as if they had already decided. Others looked like they were only pretending to listen, afraid to hope. A British flag hung limp in the humidity above the door. It might as well have been a shadow. Inside, a man with sharp blue eyes and a mustache sat behind a wooden desk. Beside him, a Chinese assistant translated his words in clipped tones. You will work hard, the assistant said, but you will earn well. You will build great railways. You will see the world. The foreigner smiled, his teeth very white. And if we die? A man behind me asked. The assistant shrugged. Then you will die far from hunger. Do you ever notice how hope sounds different when it's spoken by the desperate? It stops being light and starts to sound like a bargain. When it was my turn, the assistant pushed a paper toward me. It was covered in English words I couldn't read, with a few Chinese characters scratched underneath. 2 years, he said. Room and food provided. Pay sent to your family monthly. I hesitated. What if they don't send the money? He chuckled not unkindly. You'll be too far to check. The men behind me laughed. I didn't. That night I told my mother. She She sat by the fire, sewing a patch into her worn robe. When I spoke the words, "America, 2 years, silver every month," her hands stopped. Her eyes, red from smoke and worry, lifted slowly to mine. "So far," she said. "Too far." "I'll send money home," I told her. "You'll have medicine, food, a better place." She nodded once, her face unreadable. "If you survive," she said quietly. "If," the smallest word yet the heaviest. I tried to sleep, but the wind outside carried the sound of the river, restless like my thoughts. Would I truly be helping them or only running from the ruins? Would Father even notice I was gone? His coughing had grown worse. Each night the pipe burned longer. Sometimes I wondered if the smoke itself was trying to erase him. Wei met me the next morning by the docks. He looked proud, as if arranging my departure made him part of something larger. Progress, maybe? "The ship leaves in 2 days," he said. "Sign now or lose the chance." He didn't understand. To him, the choice was simple: poverty or possibility. To me, it felt like choosing between drowning here or in another sea. Do you think a man can belong to more than one world? Or once he leaves home, does he lose it forever? I watched as workers loaded barrels and crates onto a foreign ship. Its hull gleamed black, its name written in letters I could not read. The air smelled of coal and promise. Somewhere deep inside, something whispered go. Another voice whispered stay. Both sounded like my own. When I returned home, Father was awake for once, staring at the wall as if trying to see through it. I knelt beside him. "Father," I said, "I might go to America." He didn't answer. For a long time I thought he hadn't heard. Then, without turning his head, he said softly, "Find a place where the smoke doesn't follow you." I didn't know whether it was a blessing or a curse. That night, I folded my few belongings: a spare shirt, a small knife, and the wooden comb Mother carved before I was born. When dawn came, I stood by the door, listening to the river one last time. The sun rose slowly, pale and uncertain, like it too was deciding whether to stay or go. As I stepped outside, I realized the world was already changing without me. Foreign bells rang from the church. British soldiers marched past, laughing. The smell of opium drifted from an alley. Shanghai, once my entire world, was no longer mine to leave. It had already left me. The morning I left Shanghai, the sky was a color I had never seen before, something between ash and pearl. The harbor smelled of salt and coal smoke. Men shouted in English and Cantonese, their voices tangled with the cries of gulls. Every sound seemed sharper, as if the city itself wanted me to remember it. The British ship stood at the dock like a giant made of iron and arrogance. Her name was the Radiant Sea, but to me she looked more like a cage. 200 men waited to board, their faces a mix of fear and hope. Some carried bundles tied with string, others only the clothes on their backs. I clutched my small bag, one shirt, one knife, the wooden comb from my mother, and stepped forward when my name was called. Wei stood beside the hiring agent, a folded paper in his hand. He smiled faintly. "Remember what I told you. 2 years. Work hard. Send silver home." His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to sound proud. Behind him, the British officer stamped the papers without looking up. To him, we were just another shipment, cargo with lungs. The air on the deck was thick with coal dust and the faint sweetness of rotting fruit. Below deck, the bunks were narrow wooden shelves stacked 3 high. We lay shoulder to shoulder like books in a library no one would ever read. The ship's hull groaned as the tide pulled us away from shore. Through a small porthole, I saw the city shrinking, the wharves, the temples, the foreign flags waving goodbye without meaning it. Someone began to sing softly, a half-forgotten folk song from Guangdong. Another man joined in. Soon, the hold filled with voices, cracked, uneven, but full of something that made the air less heavy. It wasn't joy. It was survival. Do you remember the last time you saw your home fade behind you? Did you look back, or did you pretend not to? By nightfall, the lights of Shanghai were gone. Only the black water remained, stretching endlessly beneath a sky scattered with stars. The sea had no boundaries, no walls, no treaties. For the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom, and then almost immediately guilt. Freedom bought with debt. Freedom promised on paper I couldn't read. The days blurred together. Salt water dripped from the beams, mixing with sweat and the stink of too many bodies. We ate rice boiled thin with seaweed, drank water that tasted of rust. Sometimes we were allowed on deck for air. The sailors shouted orders, their English rough and rhythmic, like the sea itself speaking a language of command. They laughed among themselves, smoking pipes that smelled of something sweet. I turned away. There was an old man from Hunan who told stories to pass the time. He said his son had gone to California 5 years ago to mine for gold and never returned. Maybe he found it, I said quietly. The old man smiled, a tired smile. Or maybe it found him first. Each night, I wrote imaginary letters to my mother in my head. The sea is endless. I am alive. I dream of the rice you cook. I dream of father's hands before they trembled. But I had no paper, so the words vanished with the waves. Once, during a storm, the ship tilted so far we thought it would break. Men prayed aloud, some in dialects I didn't understand. Lightning split the sky, turning the ocean white for a heartbeat. In that flash, I saw faces, terrified, beautiful, alive. It struck me then that the sea was not our enemy. It was simply the only thing between us and the unknown. Do you think the sea remembers every soul that crosses it? Every tear that falls into its salt? Weeks passed. 2 men died, one from fever, one from despair. The British wrapped them in cloth and slid them into the water without ceremony. The sea closed over them instantly, indifferent. That night, no one sang. Then one morning the air changed. Warmer, sweeter. The smell of land. We crowded onto the deck, squinting into the sunrise. A line of green broke the horizon, hills, trees, something solid. California, someone whispered. The Golden Mountain. I thought of my mother's hands, of my father's last words. Find a place where the smoke doesn't follow you. And as the ship glided into the bay, I wondered if such a place truly existed. The wind carried the faint sound of bells from the shore. They didn't sound like home, but they sounded like beginning. They called it Gum San, the Golden Mountain. But when I first saw San Francisco, it looked more like a mountain of dust and noise. The air smelled of salt, smoke, and promise gone stale. The docks were crowded with shouting men, carts, barrels, ropes, a chaos that felt strangely familiar. Everywhere, signs I couldn't read, voices I couldn't understand. English, Irish, Cantonese, Spanish, all clashing together like waves breaking on stone. A man in a black coat shouted orders. Another pointed us toward a fenced area where a clerk waited with papers. Names? He barked. When I said mine, he frowned. Lion, what? Liang Chen, I repeated slowly. He scribbled something that looked nothing like my name and waved me through. Just like that, I was someone else, whoever he had written. We were herded into a wooden building by the shore. The agent handed each of us a ticket, a contract, and a meal of bread so dry it cut my tongue. You leave for Sacramento tomorrow, he said. Railroad work. Don't wander. His eyes swept over us as if counting coins. That night, I shared a corner of the dormitory with 3 other men. One was from Toizen, another from Fujian, the third barely 16. He told me he had come alone, his family too poor to buy even a small farewell gift. I'll send gold back to them, he said proudly. In the dim light, I didn't have the heart to tell him there was no gold waiting for us. Only work. Do you remember the first time you realized a dream could lie? That sometimes the glittering horizon is just sand catching the light? The next morning, they loaded us onto wagons heading inland. The ocean disappeared behind us, replaced by rolling hills and dry earth. The road wound through forests of pine and oak, their scent sharp in the cold air. For a moment, I thought of the riverbanks back home, how the reeds bent under the wind. But these trees didn't bend. They reached upward, tall and silent, like guardians of a land that wasn't ours. When we stopped for the night, a white overseer handed out blankets and warned us not to run. Nowhere to go, he said, tapping his revolver for emphasis. His tone was calm, almost polite. That made it worse. By the second day, the mountains appeared, immense and unforgiving. Snow still clung to their peaks even though it was spring. Men spoke quietly about the cold, about the danger, about the rumors of workers dying by the hundreds. Still no one turned back. We had already crossed one ocean. What was another mountain? At dusk, we reached a small camp nestled between the hills. Wooden shacks, smoke curling from tin chimneys, and the clatter of hammers echoed through the valley. This, they told us, was the beginning of the railroad that would one day connect the entire continent. Steel veins through a sleeping land. The foreman stood on a crate and shouted, "You dig, you blast, you carry. The faster you work, the sooner you're paid." Then he added with a grin, "Or buried." Some men laughed. Most did not. That first night in the camp, I lay awake listening to the wind. It whistled through the cracks in the walls, carrying strange scents: pine, smoke, maybe freedom. The stars above looked the same as those above Shanghai, but under them everything else had changed. Do you think the stars care whose soil we sleep on? Or do they shine the same on all who look up, no matter how far from home? I closed my eyes and thought of my mother's face, of my father's hollow hands. The promise of silver felt distant now, a story told by someone I no longer was. The railroad stretched before us like fate itself, endless and cold. We were the hands that would carve it, the bones that would hold it up. Before sleep took me, I whispered a prayer, not to gods or emperors but to the wind itself. Carry me safely, carry my name home. The wind didn't answer, but I thought I heard it sigh. The next day work began. We picked up shovels, swung hammers, and learned the rhythm of survival. Each blow against the earth was a heartbeat, steady and slow. In that rhythm I found a strange peace. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something close enough to keep me breathing. The first sound I heard each morning was the hammer. It struck the rail like thunder echoing across the valley, clang, 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 a rhythm older than language. We rose before the sun, washed in icy streams, and ate rice gone stiff from the night air. Then came the work. Always the work. The railroad camp stretched along the foothills like a scar. Wooden shacks leaned against one another, their roofs patched with tar and hope. Smoke from cook fires drifted upward, carrying the scent of salt fish and sweat. The white overseers shouted orders from horseback, their words sharp and foreign. We didn't need to understand. A whip speaks in every language. My hands blistered within the first week. By the second, the blisters had burst and hardened into calluses. By the third, the pain had become another part of me, a quiet, constant companion. We cut into the earth with picks, rolled stones down slopes, carried steel rails heavier than men. The sound of iron meeting rock was endless, a heartbeat for a world being built above our bones. Sometimes, when the wind blew down from the mountains, it carried snowflakes like white dust. They melted on our faces before we could feel the cold. I wondered if the mountain was trying to remind us how small we were. At night, the fires flickered in circles, and the men spoke softly in their dialects. Stories of home, of wives, of children they might never see again. One man carved tiny wooden animals from scrap pine, gifts for his son he hoped to send when the pay came. Another sang old Cantonese ballads, his voice rough but full of longing. Even the wind seemed to pause to listen. Do you ever think about the things we build, who they're for, and what they cost? Do you ever wonder if progress ever looks back to see the faces it buried? The foreman was a tall Irishman named O'Reilly. His beard was red as rust, his temper quick as fire. But he was fair in his own way. He didn't hit a man without warning. Once he told me, "You Chinese work quiet like ghosts. The others, they fight, they drink. But you dig." He said it like a compliment, but it didn't feel like one. The pay was always late. When it came, deductions for tools, food, and passage left almost nothing. Still, we kept working. We had no choice. To stop was to vanish. One day, an explosion shook the camp. The blasting team had misjudged the fuse. When the smoke cleared, 3 men were gone. Their names were never written down. Only their shovels remained, half buried in rock. That night, the camp was silent. Even O'Reilly removed his hat. The next morning, work resumed as if nothing had happened. The mountain does not grieve, and neither does the company. Sometimes I would look at the line of tracks stretching into the horizon, silver rails gleaming under the sun, vanishing into mist. They reminded me of the river back home, winding endlessly toward a sea I'd never seen. But the river had carried life. This iron road carried profit. When the sun sank, the mountains turned the color of blood. We ate quietly, the taste of iron dust between our teeth. The youngest worker, the boy from Toyson, asked me once, "Do you think heaven sees us?" I looked at my hands, cracked, darkened, trembling. "I think heaven has too much to watch," I said. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the valley, rattling the walls of my shack. In the distance, I heard the cry of a wolf, or maybe a man's dream breaking. I thought of my father's pipe glowing in the dark, of my mother waiting by the river, of Shanghai's harbor shining under gas lamps I would never see again. I wondered if she still kept a bowl for me at dinner. Do you ever miss a place so much that it starts to visit you instead? Not in dreams, but in moments between breaths. When the wind smells just right, or when the stars align exactly as they once did above your childhood roof. Before dawn, I rose and stood by the half-built tracks. The world was silent except for the whisper of steel cooling in the night. I pressed my palm to the cold rail and felt its pulse. It was faint but steady, a promise that this road would outlive all of us. When the sun broke over the peaks, the light struck the rail and blinded me for a heartbeat. In that glare, I saw something, not gold, not glory, but the quiet truth of all things built by hand. They shine brightest just before they rust. The first snow came early that year. It fell in slow, deliberate flakes, as if heaven itself had grown tired of haste. By morning, the camp was wrapped in white. The mountains looked softer, gentler, but beauty lies the same way a calm sea hides its depth. The cold bit through our clothes, through our bones, through the little hope we still carried. I began to write letters home. Not because I believed they would reach Shanghai, but because the words gave me warmth. Each night after work, I'd sit by the small oil lamp, the flame trembling in the wind that slipped through the cracks. I used charcoal when ink ran out, paper from discarded crates. My handwriting had grown clumsy. My hands no longer belonged to an artist's son. Mother, I wrote, the mountains here are taller than our temples. The snow falls even when the sun is shining. The work is hard, but I endure. I dream of rice warm from your pot, of father's laughter before the pipe silenced it. I will send money soon, enough for medicine, enough for peace. Then I would stop, staring at the page until the words blurred. What could I tell her that would not break her heart? That some nights, the frost clung to our blankets until morning? That we buried 2 men last week? One under a collapsed tunnel, one under a sky too heavy for breathing? That even when we survived, we were ghosts among the living? Do you ever start to write and realize that silence says more than words? The letter grew longer each night, though I knew no courier would take it. The company had no interest in our stories, only in our hands. They said wages would come soon, but soon had no date. Time, like the snow, just kept falling. O'Reilly, the foreman, tried to keep spirits up. He gave us extra rations of dried pork once a week, told crude jokes in the evening. Chinaman tough, he'd say, slapping a man's shoulder. You dig better than Irish drink. We smiled, not because it was funny, but because laughter was easier than despair. Sometimes, when the wind stilled, I could hear the echo of hammers from far down the valley. Another crew miles away building the same endless road. We would never meet them, yet our lives would join in a single line of steel. A road stretching across a continent, connecting strangers who would never know our names. Do you think the earth remembers every hand that shaped it? Or does it only remember the weight of the rails we leave behind? One night I dreamed of Shanghai. The harbor lights, the smell of the river, my mother calling my name from the doorway. She was smiling, but when I reached her, she turned to smoke, drifting upward like incense. I woke with frost in my hair and the taste of salt on my lips. The next day the snow turned to sleet. Our tools slipped in our numb fingers. One of the younger men cut his hand and bled onto the white ground. The color was so bright it hurt to look at. He laughed, saying, "At least now heaven knows I'm still here." Then he fainted. That evening, I added a final line to my letter. Mother, if this letter ever finds you, know that your son works beneath the same stars as you. When I see them, I am home. I folded the paper carefully and tied it with twine. Then I placed it in a tin box and buried it near the tracks. It felt like planting a seed, though I knew nothing would grow here but stone and silence. The wind picked up as I stood, carrying the scent of pine and iron. Above the valley, the moon glowed faintly through the clouds, a coin tossed by gods who no longer cared who caught it. I closed my eyes and imagined her reading my words, her tears mixing with the ink, her voice whispering my name across an ocean. Do you ever wonder how many letters lie buried between one world and another? Words never spoken, dreams never answered, all waiting for someone to dig them up and remember? When I returned to the shack, the fire had gone out. I lay down beside the others, the letter's ghost still warm in my chest. Outside, the rails glistened under moonlight, silver threads stitching together a land that would never be ours. The wind howled, low and endless, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. And for the first time in many nights, I slept without dreaming. The snow never stopped that winter. It fell like dust from heaven, slow and endless, covering the tracks we had laid as if the earth were trying to take them back. Each morning, we dug out what we had built the day before, only to watch it vanish again by nightfall. Progress became a word whispered, not spoken. The mountain did not care for progress. Our breath froze in the air. The wind sliced through our coats and left our skin raw. Men worked until their fingers cracked, until blood turned dark against the snow. We learned to move without thinking, to swing the pick and hammer like extensions of our heartbeat. Sometimes I wondered if the tools controlled us, if the mountain was shaping us instead of the other way around. The food grew thinner as supplies were delayed. Rice stretched with sawdust, water melted from snow. A man could spend all day carving through rock and still fall asleep hungry. And yet no one stopped. Stopping meant dying. So we worked, slower, quieter, but always forward. One evening, a storm hit so fierce the sky itself seemed to roar. The tents tore from their ropes and fires were smothered beneath walls of snow. We huddled together in the dark, the sound of wind louder than prayer. By morning, 3 men were gone, their bodies buried beneath drifts too deep to dig. We marked their names on the wooden beams of the cookhouse, though we knew the wood would burn before spring. Do you ever feel the world forgetting you even while you're still breathing? O'Reilly, the foreman, said we would be remembered. History will thank you, he told us. But his eyes said something else, something like pity. We didn't argue. It's easier to nod than to ask who writes history and in what language. One afternoon, a train came from the east, its black smoke curling into the pale sky. It was the first time I'd seen one up close, a beast of iron and fire. The ground trembled as it passed, a scream of wheels and steam. Men cheered, but I couldn't, because as it roared by, I saw my reflection in the metal, a face I barely recognized, hollow-eyed, gray with ash and cold. The train was everything we had built for, and yet it felt like a stranger passing through our graves. That night, I sat by the half-dead fire and held my hands close to the embers. The old man from Hunan sat beside me. His beard had turned white since autumn. He spoke softly, as if afraid the mountain might overhear. "My son," he said, "he used to say the world was round, that if you walk far enough, you end up where you began." He paused, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Do you think that's true?" I thought of Shanghai, of my mother watching the river, of my father's pipe glowing in the dark. "If it is," I said, "then maybe we'll find home on the other side of this mountain." He smiled. "Or maybe the world is too tired to turn." The next morning, the old man didn't wake. His body was stiff, his face peaceful. We wrapped him in his blanket and buried him beside the rails he had helped build. Snow covered the mound before the sun rose high enough to warm it. Do you think the dead dream of what they leave behind? Do you think they hear the sound of the hammers long after we stop? Weeks passed. The cold eased, but the silence stayed. Each strike of the hammer echoed longer, emptier. The men spoke less, worked more. Every swing of the pick felt heavier, as if the mountain had begun to feed on our strength. We were carving a road for the world, and in doing so, carving away pieces of ourselves. Sometimes, at dusk, I would walk along the unfinished tracks. They stretched into the distance like frozen rivers, gleaming faintly in the dying light. I would close my eyes and imagine them alive. Trains rushing across the land, carrying people who would never know our names. They would look out their windows, see the beauty of the mountains, and call it progress. None would think of the men who slept beneath their rails. The wind rose again, cold and thin, singing through the gaps in the iron. It almost sounded like music, low, sad, eternal. I stood there until my fingers went numb, listening to it play. And for the first time, I understood what my father once said when his shop was taken away. Some things are built to last. Others are built to forget. The snow began again as I turned back toward camp, the world falling quiet under its soft, endless white. When the snow melted, the mountain gave back what it chose to keep. Sometimes a pickaxe, sometimes a hat, sometimes nothing at all. Men began to vanish that spring. Not in storms or accidents, at least not the kind you could bury. They simply stopped showing up at the morning line. No one asked too loudly where they'd gone. Maybe they'd run off to the cities, some said. Maybe they'd fallen behind on the trail. Maybe they'd become part of the mountain, like the rails we hammered into its ribs. The company never kept full records. Names were written, then smudged, then replaced. One life became another without question. We learned not to count the faces too closely. To count was to remember, and memory hurt. Do you ever notice how silence can spread like frost? How one missing voice turns into 2, then 10, until the whole camp sounds hollow. O'Reilly said men were leaving for better wages farther west. He said it as if explaining the weather. but his eyes avoided ours. He knew what we knew, that some had gone into the tunnels and never come out. The blasting powder was old, the air thin, the rock too heavy for mercy. The tunnels were like mouths that swallowed the careless and the unlucky alike. One evening, while carrying timber to the new line, I found a boot half buried in mud. Inside, a foot still wearing it. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for some emotion to rise. Fear, sorrow, anything. But all I felt was the weight of exhaustion, like I'd already mourned the man before I knew he was gone. I covered the boot with soil and whispered a prayer without words. The next day, another worker, a boy no older than 16, disappeared. He'd been cheerful the night before, singing while cooking rice. By morning, his bunk was empty, his bowl still full. The others said maybe he'd gone back east or followed rumors of gold. But deep down, we knew the mountain had claimed him too. That night, I dreamed of the river in Shanghai again. But this time, its surface was filled with faces floating silently downstream, their eyes open, watching the world drift away from them. When I woke, the wind outside was howling through the half-built rails, making the same sound I'd heard in the dream. Do you think the world forgets the ones who build it? Or do we live on in the things we leave behind? In the bridges, the walls, the roads no one stops to thank? The camp shrank as weeks passed. Those who remained grew quieter. No one laughed anymore at O'Reilly's jokes. Even the Irish crew stopped singing their rough songs at night. The mountain had taken our voices along with our names. One afternoon, as we cleared a path near the ridge, we found a tunnel entrance collapsed. A narrow opening half filled with stone and dust. Someone had carved a symbol above it, crude but careful. 2 circles overlapping like the eyes of a spirit. None of us knew who had drawn it or what it meant. But we all touched the mark before walking away. A small gesture, a quiet agreement. If we vanished next, maybe someone would remember that we'd been here. O'Reilly tried to keep order, but even he began to look older. His beard streaked with white, his hands trembling when he lit his pipe. Once the stretch is done, he told me one evening, I'll head back east. Too many ghosts in these hills. I nodded. He didn't have to explain which ghosts. The nights grew longer again. Sometimes I would wake to the sound of footsteps outside. Soft, measured, as if someone walked the line inspecting the rails. But when I stepped out, there was no one. Only the wind and the faint echo of hammer blows carried from nowhere. Some said the spirits of the missing men kept working, unwilling to rest until the line was finished. I wanted to believe that. It made the silence easier to bear. One dawn, I stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. The first train from the east was crawling toward us, black smoke trailing behind like a memory refusing to fade. As it passed, I thought I saw shapes along the embankment, faint, translucent, moving in rhythm with the rails. Maybe it was mist. Maybe it was them. Do you believe the dead stay close to what they've built? Or do they drift elsewhere, waiting for someone, somewhere, to remember their names when the wind grows quiet? When the train vanished around the bend, I whispered to the empty air. Not a prayer, not a farewell, just a promise. I will remember. We began the bridge in early summer, when the thaw had turned the valleys green again. The company wanted it finished before winter, a span of timber and iron stretching across a gorge so deep that even sound seemed afraid to cross. They called it the Emperor's Pass, a name chosen by men who had never felt the wind clawing at their skin up there. From dawn to dusk, we hauled beams across narrow ledges, our bodies swaying with every gust. Below us, the river glimmered like a blade. If you dropped a stone, it vanished long before you heard it strike. Each plank we laid felt like building a road to heaven, or to something just beyond its reach. The work demanded everything. We hammered, lifted, balanced, breathed dust until our lungs burned. When one of us slipped, there was no scream, only the faint echo of fabric tearing and the long silence that followed. O'Reilly stopped keeping count. He just whispered a name under his breath and motioned for us to keep going. There were deadlines, he said. There were always deadlines. At night, the bridge glowed faintly under the moon. The metal rails gleamed, the wooden beams stretched like the ribs of a sleeping giant. It looked beautiful from a distance, the kind of beauty that hides pain in plain sight. Do you ever look at something magnificent and feel the sadness built into it? How every creation demands a quiet offering from those who made it. One morning, we were ordered to clear the ridge for dynamite. I had learned to dread that word, dynamite. It meant danger wrapped in promise. The foreman shouted, the fuses were set, the men ran. But the fuse burned too fast. The blast came before we were clear. A wave of fire and smoke swallowed the air. When it cleared, part of the bridge was gone. So were 7 men. The smoke rose high into the sky, curling like an offering to gods that had long stopped listening. We stood frozen, covered in ash. No one spoke. Even O'Reilly's voice was gone. Later, when the wind died, we gathered what pieces we could find. A glove, a twisted helmet, a small wooden charm scorched black. We buried them beside the gorge. No priest, no flag, no hymns. Only the sound of the river below, endless and unjudging. That night I couldn't sleep. The sky was a bruised violet, the kind that comes after storms. I sat on a beam overlooking the valley, my hands trembling from cold and memory. In the distance, the bridge stood half-finished, its silhouette like a broken spine against the stars. I thought of the men who had fallen, their lives now part of this structure that would carry strangers long after we were gone. Progress, they called it, but it looked more like a monument to forgetting. Do you think the world knows how much it costs to be built? Every brick, every road, every shining city, all balanced on the backs of those who never got to walk them? A few days later, replacements arrived, new workers, faces still full of light. They asked no questions. They were told this was a good job, steady pay, a chance to see America. I wanted to warn them, but my tongue felt heavy with dust and futility. Maybe some truths are too cruel to speak aloud. The bridge was finished by autumn. When the last rail was laid, O'Reilly stood with his hat off, his face hard to read. "We built something," he said quietly. I nodded, though neither of us believed the words. The first train to cross roared like a storm. Its smoke poured upward, thick and gray, spreading across the gorge until the entire valley looked like it was burning again. Men cheered, cameras flashed, officials shook hands. No one mentioned the ones who had disappeared beneath that smoke. As the engine thundered past, the bridge shuddered, a sound both proud and weary. I closed my eyes and imagined I could hear voices beneath the steel. The echo of hammers, the rhythm of hearts that had stopped beating. Do you think ghosts ever rest when the world keeps moving above them? Or do they walk the same path forever, waiting for someone to notice? When the train vanished into the distance, the smoke lingered, curling in slow, graceful shapes that reminded me of the incense rising from my mother's altar back home. And for a moment I imagined she could see it too. Her son standing among ghosts, watching a bridge of smoke stretch into the endless blue. The first letter came in the autumn wind. A trader from Sacramento brought it, folded and worn, the edges softened by travel. He said it had passed through many hands before finding mine, the way lost memories sometimes drift back by accident. The writing on the front was uneven, the ink faded, but the name was clear enough, Liang Chen. No English, just my name and my mother's brushstrokes. For a long while I didn't open it. The paper felt fragile, too light to carry what I feared it might say. That night, after the others slept, I held it close to the lamp. The flame flickered as if it too was nervous. When I unfolded the letter, a trace of home rose from it, the scent of smoke and river water. "My son," it began, "your words have not reached us, but I know you live. A mother knows these things. The river still runs, though the water is lower. Your father grows weaker, but he smiles when I speak your name. He says you are working where the sun never rests." Her handwriting trembled more than before. "The foreigners have built new houses by the docks. Their ships are like floating cities. The streets are louder now, but the sky above remains the same. When you look up, do you see it too?" I stopped there. The lamp hissed softly. For a moment, I forgot where I was, forgot the smell of iron and sweat, the distant thunder of hammers. All I could hear was her voice, written across distance and time. Do you ever hold something so small, yet feel it contains an entire world? Further down, she had added one last line, almost an afterthought. "If you can, come home before the river changes its course." I didn't know what she meant then. But even now, those words echo in me like the mountain wind. The next day I tried to write back. "Mother, I live. I work hard. I will send money soon. The mountains are cold, but I think of you when the sun rises." I stared at the half-written page and realized the lie in every word. What money? What sun? I burned the letter before finishing it, watching the ash rise like the smoke from Father's pipe. The others heard about my letter and gathered that evening around the fire, quiet but curious. One man asked if my mother was well. I nodded. He smiled faintly. "Then she's luckier than most." From his coat, he pulled out a crumpled envelope. Mine came last winter, he said. But it wasn't from home. It was returned unopened. He fed it into the flames without another word. The fire crackled softly, and for a moment, the camp felt like a shrine. Each man staring into the light, each with his own ghost sitting beside him. O'Reilly came by, handing out the day's pay slips. His face looked tired. He paused beside me and nodded toward the letter in my hands. "Good news?" he asked. I hesitated. "It's from home," I said. He smiled faintly. "Then that's good enough." He walked away before I could ask if he ever received letters himself. Maybe men like him didn't. Maybe that's why they stayed moving, because stillness meant remembering. That night, I placed my mother's letter inside my shirt, close to my chest. It warmed me better than the blanket ever could. When the wind rose outside, carrying the scent of pine and snow, I imagined it passing over the ocean, brushing through Shanghai's narrow alleys, stirring the curtains of our small home. Maybe she could feel it too, that same wind, that same heartbeat stretched across the world. Do you think words can travel beyond paper? That somewhere, even if they're never read, the ones we love can still hear what we mean to say? I dreamed of her that night, sitting by the river, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes watching the water flow. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The river carried her voice for her, soft and steady. When I woke, my pillow was damp with tears I didn't remember shedding. At dawn, the whistle blew for work. I tucked the letter into my pocket and walked toward the rising sun. The rails gleamed with frost, the valley shimmering in pale gold. For the first time, I didn't hate the sound of the hammers. Each strike felt like a message, a way to remind the world that we were still here, still building, still writing letters into the earth itself. By the time summer returned, the earth no longer smelled like spring. It smelled of iron, sweat, and ash, a scent that clung to everything we touched. The railroad had stretched far into the wilderness now, slicing across valleys like a scar that refused to heal. Behind us lay hundreds of miles of track. Beneath them lay something heavier. One morning, while clearing debris after a rock slide, my shovel struck something that was not stone. It made a dull, hollow sound. I knelt and brushed away the dirt. A piece of bone, small and smooth. Not animal. Human. The foreman said nothing when I showed him. He just stared for a moment, then motioned to cover it back up. "Keep working," he said. The tone in his voice was not cruel, just tired, as if he had seen too many bones already. That day I couldn't focus. Every strike of the pickaxe felt like it might open another grave. When the whistle blew for lunch, no one spoke. We all knew what was beneath our feet. We just didn't dare give it a name. Do you ever wonder what happens to the dead when no one remembers them? Do they fade completely, or do they stay waiting for someone brave enough to look down? At dusk, I walked along the tracks. The rails glowed faintly, still warm from the sun. Somewhere behind the mountains, another explosion echoed. Another tunnel, another sacrifice. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder chasing ghosts. The younger workers still joked sometimes. They said the mountain was hungry, that it demanded payment for every mile of steel. They laughed, but their laughter trembled, because we all knew it was true. For every 10 men who came, one would not leave. For every mile of track, a name was lost. And yet the world would call it progress. That night, a storm came without warning. Lightning split the sky in two, rain pouring down in silver sheets. The wind tore through the camp, scattering tents like paper. In the chaos, a slope gave way near the supply shed. By morning it was gone, and so were 2 men sleeping beside it. We dug for hours, our fingers numb and raw. When we finally reached them, their faces were peaceful, eyes closed as if they were only resting. I remember thinking they looked almost relieved. We buried them by the river, marked their names with stones. But the rain came again, washing even those away. Sometimes at night I hear the rails hum. A low vibration that runs through the ground, steady and endless. Some men say it's the wind. Others say it's the souls of the dead, still working, still carrying the load. I like to think it's both. Do you believe the world remembers in its own way, not with monuments, but with echoes? That maybe every gust of wind over these tracks carries a name the earth refuses to forget? A few days later, O'Reilly walked beside me as we inspected the new section of line. His beard was thinner now, his eyes red from sleeplessness. He stopped suddenly, staring at the horizon. "Someday," he said softly, "trains will cross this land in a single day. People will see the beauty of it all, and never think of us." I didn't answer. He didn't expect me to. The truth didn't need words. That evening, the sky burned gold over the hills. Smoke from the day's blasts curled upward, drifting like prayer incense in some vast temple. For a moment, the world was silent. No hammers, no shouting, no grief. Only wind and light, weaving together like a lullaby. And I thought, maybe this is what peace looks like. Not the absence of pain, but the moment the pain finally accepts its place. When darkness fell, I wrote another letter I would never send. Mother, if you walk along the river and feel the ground tremble, it might be me. Don't be afraid. It's only the world remembering my footsteps. I folded the paper and placed it beneath a rail, pressing it into the soil. The next train would seal it there forever. A letter to the earth itself. Do you think the ground dreams of those who've built upon it? Do you think, somewhere beneath all this iron, there's still a heartbeat waiting to be heard? The wind rose again, carrying the faint metallic scent of rain. And as I lay down that night, I imagined the rails glowing softly in the dark, a line of silver bones connecting the living to the forgotten. It happened without warning. Not a sound at first, only a vibration deep and low like the mountain drawing breath. Then came the roar. A wall of earth collapsing, rocks tumbling, the sky vanishing in dust. For a moment, it was as if the world itself had decided to fall. We were working near the ridge that morning, laying the final section of track before the next blast. Someone shouted. Someone else ran. And then the slope gave way. Men disappeared mid-step, swallowed whole by the dirt. The air turned black with debris. I couldn't see my own hands. When the noise finally stopped, silence felt wrong, too sudden, too wide. We began to dig with whatever we had. Shovels, hands, broken boards. The ground was hot from friction, steaming in the cold air. By sunset, we had pulled out 5 bodies. We knew there were more. O'Reilly stood apart, hat in his hands. His face was covered in dust, the red of his beard turned gray. Enough for today, he said hoarsely. The mountain's not done with us. His voice cracked at the edges. We obeyed, though none of us could rest. That night, the fires burned low. No one spoke above a whisper. Even the wind seemed to have lost its voice. I sat by the rails, my fingers tracing the cold metal. They felt like veins pulsing faintly under the starlight, as if the earth still breathed beneath us. Do you ever wonder how much sorrow the ground can hold before it begins to shake? By dawn, the company men arrived from the east. Their coats were clean, their boots untouched by mud. They spoke in clipped tones, looked at the ruins, then at their watches. Work must resume, one said. Time is money. He never looked at the bodies. They promised compensation. Silver coins for each man lost. Enough, they said, to ease the pain. As if grief could be measured by weight. As if a life could be tallied like a ledger entry. O'Reilly said nothing during their speech. When they left, he turned toward us and said quietly, "Men, the mountain's tired of us. But the line must go through." He met my eyes for a moment, and in that look I saw something break. The following days blurred together. We dug, we hammered, we cleared the debris inch by inch. Sometimes we found pieces of clothing. Sometimes nothing at all. One afternoon, a man unearthed a wooden comb, smooth, carved, somehow untouched by the fall. It wasn't mine, though it looked like the one my mother had made for me. He handed it to me anyway. "Keep it," he said, "for the ones we can't name." I did. At sunset, when the valley turned gold, smoke rose from the burned trees. It drifted across the camp, wrapping everything in a haze. The air tasted like ashes. We worked slower, our movements automatic. Every sound echoed as if the mountain were listening, deciding whether to forgive us. Do you think a place remembers those who die within it? Or does it close itself around them, keeping their stories quiet so the living can continue pretending? That night, I dreamed of the river again. But now it ran black with soot. From the far bank, men called my name, their faces hidden by mist. I tried to cross, but every step sank deeper into mud. When I woke, my hands were clenched, nails cutting into my palms. O'Reilly gathered us at dawn. The new orders were simple: rebuild the section before winter. He didn't look anyone in the eye. I could tell he had stopped believing the words he was forced to say. We all had. As the weeks passed, we finished the repairs. The line continued west, unbroken, gleaming beneath the pale sun. When the first train passed again, its smoke rose straight into the air. A dark column twisting against the bright sky. For a moment, It looked like incense rising from a temple, a prayer for those buried below. I took the comb from my pocket and laid it beside the tracks, not as an offering but as a reminder. Wood for the woodcutters, a piece of life among the steel. Then I walked away without looking back. Do you believe mountains forgive those who wound them? Or do they simply wait, silent, patient, for time to bring everyone home again? As dust returning to dust? That night, the wind came down from the ridge carrying the faint smell of fire. It brushed against my face like a hand I almost recognized. And in that moment, I knew the mountain had accepted what we'd taken, but not without keeping something in return. Winter came like a closing door. The first snow fell quietly, coating the rails in white silk. The air grew thin, sharp as glass. Every sound, the creak of timber, the breath of horses, the cough of tired men, seemed to vanish into the stillness. We were nearing the end of the line now. A few dozen miles left before the mountains gave way to open plains. The company said it would be finished by spring, that we would all return richer, freer, changed. But winter changes everything. The ground turned hard as stone. Our hammers bounced against the frozen soil. Water buckets froze solid overnight. Sometimes we woke to find our blankets stiff with frost. A man could die in his sleep that way, quietly, without struggle, like a candle burning itself out. Do you know that kind of cold? The one that makes your breath sound like someone else's? O'Reilly grew thinner, his hands trembling when he tried to light his pipe. He stopped shouting orders. Now he only spoke when he had to. The younger men, restless and hungry, whispered that he'd lost his nerve. But I saw what they couldn't, that the mountain had taken something from him and never given it back. We rationed everything. Food, coal, even conversation. Words became precious things used only when necessary. At night, the fire burned blue, barely enough to warm our hands. Sometimes I imagined I could see the faces of the dead in the flames, smiling faintly as if reminding us not to stop. The work continued. Steel on stone, breath on frost. Each spike hammered down like a heartbeat. Sometimes the rhythm itself kept us alive. One evening, while fixing a damaged section, I heard a soft humming. At first, I thought it was the wind through the pines. Then I realized it came from one of the workers. A boy no older than 16, singing in a dialect from Guangdong. The words were simple, about rivers and moonlight, but his voice carried something pure, something untouched by this place. When he finished, no one spoke. We just listened to the silence that followed, and for a brief moment it felt like home. Do you believe songs can survive where people cannot? That maybe sound, once born, never truly dies, it just keeps echoing somewhere the wind remembers? By January, sickness swept through the camp. Fever, coughs, lungs turning to fire. We buried 3 men in a week. The ground was too frozen for graves, so we built cairns of stone over their bodies. The snow fell again, covering them until they disappeared, as if the mountain had taken them back. O'Reilly caught the fever soon after. He refused to stop working. When we tried to help him back to his tent, he shook his head. "Don't waste the daylight," he said, his breath white against the air. By nightfall he was gone. We burned his coat and tools beside the tracks. A soldier's farewell in a land that would never know his name. The flames danced low, reflected in the frozen rails. I wondered if he saw them from wherever he'd gone. The next morning the sky cleared. The world glittered, mountains white and endless, the rails a silver line vanishing toward the sun. For the first time in weeks, it was beautiful. Painfully so. I took the comb from my pocket, the one I'd kept since the landslide, and ran it once through my hair. The teeth caught on ice. Then I laid it down on the snow beside the track, beside the place where O'Reilly had stood every morning. "May the next train remember you," I whispered. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind pressed against the tent walls like an animal searching for warmth. I lay there, watching the thin flame of my lamp tremble. I thought about my mother, her hands rough from washing clothes. I thought about the men whose names I never learned. And I thought about the line we were building, how it would carry strangers one day, none of them knowing whose bones had paved their way. Do you think the living ever truly walk alone? Or are we always treading softly over the dreams of those who came before us? Outside, the rails gleamed beneath the moonlight, stretching endlessly toward the dark horizon. And for the first time, I realized the line was not just a path across the land. It was a line through time itself. Every hammer strike, every footprint, every heartbeat, woven together, for someone else to follow long after we are gone. When spring finally came, it was almost hard to believe. The ice melted slowly, revealing the tracks beneath like bones waking from sleep. The valley was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after something ends. Not peace, but exhaustion. We had done it. The line was finished. The great iron road now stretched from ocean to ocean, cutting across mountains, rivers, and memory itself. On the morning of the final inspection, we stood beside the tracks, each man silent, hats in hand. The officials came with papers and photographers. They posed us like trophies, the Chinese laborers in the background, the engineers in the front. I watched the shutter click, sealing our faces in a moment that would never tell the truth. No one would see the frostbite scars. No one would hear the names we whispered into the soil. When they were done, they gave us our pay. Thin envelopes that felt lighter than they should. "Good work, boys," one of them said, his accent rough, his smile polite. Then they boarded their carriage and left, wheels clattering over the very rails we'd built. Do you ever finish something so vast that when it ends, you feel smaller than before? We were free to go now, free in a land that did not want us. Some men planned to stay, to work in the new towns springing up along the railroad. Others talked of gold mines, of laundries and small shops. I thought of home, of the river, of my mother's letter. It had been 2 years since I left Shanghai. 2 years of sweat, death, and silence. Would she still wait by the door, watching the river's edge? Would she recognize the man I had become? The journey west to San Francisco felt like traveling through ghosts. We passed bridges we had built, tunnels we had carved, towns that hadn't existed before. Each mile was familiar and strange at once, as if the land itself was already forgetting who had shaped it. When I reached the city, the air smelled of salt and smoke. Ships lined the harbor, their masts dabbing at the sky. The streets were alive with sound, bells, horses, laughter, arguments in a dozen tongues. For a moment, I thought I was back in Shanghai's foreign concession, only louder, brighter, harsher. There were signs in every window. Help wanted. No Chinese. Some stores didn't bother with signs. Their doors simply closed when I approached. I slept in the harbor district, near the other workers, in rooms so small we had to take turns lying down. The pay was worse here, but at least there was no mountain to swallow us. One night, I found a small shop that sold paper, brushes, and ink. The scent of it, faintly sweet like home, made my chest tighten. I bought one sheet. Just one. That night, under the flicker of an oil lamp, I began a letter I had been writing in my mind for months. Mother, I have seen the ocean from both sides now. The mountains no longer frighten me. I have built a road for others to travel, but my heart still waits by the river. I paused, the brush trembling. Outside, fog rolled in from the bay, wrapping the city in pale gray. In the distance, I heard a ship's whistle, low, mournful, like a call from another world. Do you think letters ever find their way even without an address? Do they drift, like leaves, until someone kind enough reads them aloud to the wind? I folded the paper carefully and sealed it with wax. The postmaster took it without a glance. I didn't expect an answer. Some words aren't meant to return, they're meant to rest. The next morning, I walked down to the docks. Ships bound for China swayed in the tide. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine stepping aboard one, to feel the ocean wind, to watch the western shore fade. But the fare was too high and my pockets too light. So I stayed, listening to the waves lap against the wood. Beside me, a young boy was tossing pebbles into the water. He looked up and asked, "Mister, where do the stones go when they sink?" I smiled. "Home," I said. "They go home." The boy nodded as if that made perfect sense, and I watched the ripples fade into stillness, wondering if one day I would too. The harbor never slept. Even in the small hours before dawn, it breathed, slow, heavy, endless. The waves rolled against the wooden piers, the sound deep and steady like a heartbeat beneath the city. Sometimes, when the fog was thick enough to hide the ships, I imagined the water whispering in Chinese, carrying voices from across the Pacific. I lived in a narrow alley off DuPont Street. The buildings leaned inward, their roofs nearly touching, their windows glowing faintly through smoke. We called it Tangrenjie, Chinatown, though the Americans used other names, most of them unkind. Laundry steam rose through the morning air. Vendors shouted in dialects that blended together until the whole street sounded like memory. Here, everyone worked too much and dreamed too little. Men who once built railroads now mended clothes or carried crates down at the docks. We shared rooms, meals, even silence. In the evenings after long shifts, we gathered outside the tea house, not to talk but to listen. The owner played an old eru. Its thin, sorrowful tone wound through the night like smoke from incense. Do you know that kind of sound? The one that doesn't fill the air but empties it, leaving space for what's gone? I met May there. She served tea with careful hands, never spilling a drop. Her English was better than mine, learned from missionaries before the war reached her village. She never spoke of her past and I never asked. Some things you can hear without words. We would talk late into the night after the others had gone. She asked what I missed most about home. The river, I said. It moved slowly like time itself. She smiled. Maybe the ocean is just a river that forgot where it began. Her voice carried that same calm sadness I had heard in the mountains, the sound of people who had seen too much and survived anyway. Work came and went. Some days I unloaded cargo from ships bound for Singapore or Calcutta. Other days I repaired nets for fishermen who never met my eyes. The pay was small but enough to eat. Enough to keep breathing. That's all most of us wanted. One afternoon, while stacking crates near the pier, I found a familiar smell, sharp, sweet, poisonous. A broken box spilled its contents across the deck, gray powder packed in paper. The label read medical supplies. But I knew better. Opium. Even here, an ocean away, it followed us. The same smoke that destroyed my fathers will now traveled openly under British flags, sanctioned and taxed. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked to the end of the pier, the fog wrapping around me like cloth. Lanterns floated in the water, offerings from a nearby festival. Tiny flames drifting toward the horizon. They looked like lost souls searching for home. Do you think the sea ever grows tired of carrying the dead? May found me there, shivering in the cold. She said nothing, only placed a cup of warm tea in my hands. We stood side by side, watching the lights fade one by one. After a while, she whispered, "My brother smoked it too, before he died." Her voice trembled, barely more than breath. I thought leaving China would save us. But it waits everywhere, doesn't it? I nodded. The ocean didn't wash things away, it only carried them farther. A few days later, the police raided a nearby den. They dragged men into the street, shouting words I didn't understand. Some were beaten. Some disappeared. The next morning, the papers said nothing. We swept the blood into the drains and opened our shops again. The city continued, indifferent as the tide. That evening, I returned to the pier. The tide was low, the air still. I closed my eyes and listened to the harbor breathe. Each wave whispered something different. Names, memories, promises. I imagined the ocean as a great mirror, reflecting everything we tried to forget. Do you believe places can hold sorrow the way people do? That every shore remembers the footsteps of those who once dreamed upon it? The fog began to lift, revealing the first light of dawn. Ships waited in the bay, their sails catching the pale sun. For the first time in months, I thought about leaving. Not back to China, not yet, but somewhere quieter where the wind didn't carry so many ghosts. I turned toward home, passing lanterns still burning faintly in the gutters. Their flames flickered, stubborn and small. And I realized, maybe that's what we were, all of us here. Little lights in a foreign harbor, trembling in the wind, but still burning. The rain began before dawn, soft, persistent, the kind that lingers on rooftops long after the clouds have gone. I woke to its rhythm tapping against the window, steady as a heartbeat. The harbor below was wrapped in mist. Ships moved like shadows, their bells muffled by the fog. It was a morning that felt between worlds, not quite night, not yet day. When I stepped outside, the air smelled of wet wood and salt. A mail courier passed through the alley, his cart creaking under the weight of letters from across the sea. We watched him the way starving men watch food. Every envelope carried a fragment of another life, a promise, a memory, a voice. He stopped in front of the tea house, calling names. 2 letters for a merchant from Guangdong, 1 for a tailor. And then he read mine, Liang Chen. The sound startled me. I hadn't heard my full name spoken aloud in months. The paper was damp, edges curling. The handwriting was familiar, my mother's, faint but deliberate. I turned it over in my hands, afraid to open it. Afraid it might be the last one. Inside, the ink had bled, but I could still read the words. My son, the river runs slower now. The traders speak of new ships and new taxes. The streets are crowded with strangers. Your father is gone. He spoke your name before the end. He said you were strong and that strength was his gift to you. The words blurred. I could almost hear her voice, tired, thin but steady. I'm still here though the nights are long. Come home when you can. The plum tree still blooms every spring even when the frost tries to stop it. That line undid me. I read it again and again until the paper tore. Do you ever hold a piece of paper so close that it feels alive? As if the person who wrote it might feel your breath through the ink? I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my jacket. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened. Steam rose from the drains like ghosts leaving the earth. May found me at the pier later that day. She saw the letter before I spoke. Without asking, she took my hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. We stood there in silence, the wind tugging at our sleeves. I wanted to tell her everything, about the mountains, the bones, the railroad, the promise I had made to return. But no words came. Grief is a language that doesn't translate. That night, I went to the temple on Clay Street. It was small, hidden between two warehouses. The air inside smelled of sandalwood and sea salt. An old monk sat by the altar, eyes half closed, counting his beads. I placed my mother's letter beside the incense bowl. She is far away, I said quietly. The monk looked at me without surprise. Far is a matter of the heart, he said. Those who love us walk beside us, even when we cannot see their footprints. He lit another stick of incense. The smoke rose slowly, curling toward the ceiling like a question without an answer. For a moment, the air shimmered, and I thought I saw her silhouette by the doorway watching, smiling. Do you think the dead visit us not to haunt, but to remind us that memory is a kind of home? I left the temple long after midnight. The rain had returned, light as dust. The city was quiet, only the ocean's pulse remained. When I reached my room, I took out the letter again. The ink had faded more. Soon it would disappear completely. So I began to write beneath it, using my brush in careful strokes. Mother, the river in my dreams still runs clear. I will come home one day. Maybe not as your son, but as the wind that moves the branches of your plum tree. I placed the letter near the window so the dawn could find it first. Outside, the fog lifted slowly, revealing the harbor's restless shimmer. Ships waited with sails folded, as if even they hesitated to leave. Do you ever wonder if the world keeps the promises we can't? The light crept across the floor, touching the torn edge of the paper, and for the briefest moment, it looked like gold. It began with the smell of smoke. At first, faint, drifting through the narrow alleys like a whisper too soft to fear. Then stronger, thicker, until it clung to our clothes and hair. By the time the bells began to ring, the night sky above Chinatown was already burning. The fire started near the wharves, where the wind moved fast and the buildings leaned too close together. Flames jumped from one roof to another, hungry, graceful, unstoppable. People shouted in every tongue, English, Cantonese, Taishanese. But the fire understood only one language, hunger. I ran with the others toward the main street, carrying what I could. The air was hot, the smoke alive. Children cried. Old men coughed until their knees gave way. Some tried to save their shops. Others stood frozen, watching decades of labor turn to ash in a single hour. Do you know the sound of wood collapsing? That deep, hollow sigh when a home exhales its last breath? By dawn, the fire had devoured half the district. Ash drifted through the air like gray snow. The wind carried it into the harbor, where it settled gently on the water, turning the waves the color of morning. The city's newspapers called it a necessary cleansing. They said the fire had burned away the filth, that the rebuilding would make Chinatown safer, more modern. But for us it felt like erasure. A second exile, this time by flame. I found May standing in front of what was once the tea house. The sign had fallen, the windows shattered. She held a cracked teapot in her hands, the porcelain blackened by soot. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. It still holds, she said, as if that small miracle was enough. We sat together on the curb, watching the smoke drift toward the hills. The air smelled of burned sugar and iron. That night, we slept in the open square with hundreds of others. The city officials brought blankets, bread, promises. They said they would help us rebuild, but their eyes told another story. By morning, the bulldozers arrived before the doctors did. Rumors spread fast, that the land beneath our homes was too valuable, that the fire had given the city a reason to start anew, without us. Some said it was fate, others called it theft. I only knew that whatever we rebuilt would no longer be ours. In the weeks that followed, I worked clearing debris for a few dollars a day. Each plank I lifted felt like a memory. The sound of laughter, the warmth of tea, the scent of sandalwood. Gone. Everything gone. One evening, as the sun set behind the blackened rooftops, May found a small piece of paper half buried in the ash. It was one of the prayer notes people burned during the festival, charred but still legible. It read, "May the next life be kinder." She handed it to me without a word. I kept it in my pocket. Do you believe the world gives second lives to those who lose everything? Or do we simply keep walking through the same story, hoping to change the ending? Months passed. New buildings rose, taller and whiter, their signs in English now. The old alleys disappeared beneath fresh bricks. When I walked through them, I no longer knew where I was. It was still Chinatown, they said, but it smelled different, sounded different, like a song translated too many times. May opened a small tea stall by the docks. She never replaced the cracked teapot. "It reminds me that things can survive the fire," she said. Her hands were rough from work, but her eyes still carried that same quiet strength, the kind that endures without demanding to be seen. Sometimes I would sit there at dusk, watching the ships in the harbor turn gold under the setting sun. The light touched everything. The new walls, the blackened ruins, the water glinting with ash. It was beautiful in a way that hurt. Do you think beauty can exist even in what's broken? Or is it only our need for meaning that makes it so? As the sun sank, I would close my eyes and listen to the faint hum of the city rebuilding itself. Hammer, wheel, breath, all the same rhythm. And in that rhythm, beneath the noise of progress, I thought I could still hear the old Chinatown breathing. Faint, stubborn, alive. By the time the new year came, I had grown used to silence. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that settles, soft, heavy, and almost kind. The city outside my window no longer frightened me. It hummed with its usual pulse, carts rolling, bells ringing, the sea breathing just beyond the hills. Yet beneath all that sound, I could feel another rhythm, faint, distant, familiar. The rhythm of the river came to me sometimes in dreams. I would see the narrow banks of home, the water rippling gold in the morning light. My mother's hands rinsing clothes by the shore. My father, younger again, laughing in the sunlight before the smoke found him. Then the dream would fade, leaving only the sound of running water, and the ache that followed. Do you ever wake from a dream so vivid you're unsure which world you belong to? One evening, May found me sitting by the pier, staring at the ocean as if I could read its currents. "You're thinking of home again," she said. I nodded. "Sometimes I think the sea remembers," I told her. "All rivers end here. Maybe mine still knows the way." She smiled faintly. "Then one day you'll follow it back." That night I couldn't sleep. The fog crept in from the bay, sliding through the window cracks, cool and damp against my skin. The sound of ships rocked me awake. Each horn, each creak of rope, sounded like a voice calling my name. I thought of the letter from my mother, the one now folded thin as silk from reading too many times. The ink almost gone, her words still glowing faintly in my mind. Come home before the river changes its course. But what if the river had already changed? What if I returned only to find strangers walking its banks, and the house gone, and the memories turned into stories told by others? I closed my eyes and listened to the ocean. It didn't answer, it never did. But its rhythm matched my heart, steady and tired, as if the two had long shared the same beat. Weeks passed like waves, coming, breaking, leaving nothing but foam. Work slowed. Trade shifted north. Many of my friends left the city, some chasing gold, some simply disappearing. May stayed. Her tea stall had become a quiet refuge, a place where lost men like me could rest for a while. One afternoon, she placed a newspaper before me. On the front page, a headline, "China opens new ports." Beneath it, smaller lines, "Foreign powers expand their reach once more." I read it twice, then folded it away. It felt like history repeating itself. The same tide rising again under a different moon. "Will you go back?" May asked softly. I looked at her hands, the faint scars from the fire, the warmth in her touch. "I don't know," I said. "Home is not where I left it anymore." That night, I walked alone to the edge of the wharf. The moon hung low, resting on the water like a coin dropped by some careless god. The tide whispered against the wood. I thought of the mountain, the rails, the men buried beneath them. I thought of O'Reilly's tired eyes, of the boy who sang in the snow. of every face that had faded behind the smoke of progress. Do you believe the places we leave ever forgive us for leaving? I reached into my pocket and took out the prayer note May had found in the ashes months ago. May the next life be kinder. I unfolded it slowly, smoothed the creases, and placed it on the water. The paper floated for a moment, trembling, then drifted away. The current caught it, pulling it toward the open sea. Somewhere far beyond that horizon was the river of my childhood. The same river that had once carried my father's ashes. The same river that now carried my promise. I whispered to the tide. If you find her, tell her I remember. Do you think the wind carries messages across oceans? Not in words, but in moments like this, when silence itself becomes a kind of prayer. As I turned to leave, the lanterns along the pier flickered, one by one. The harbor glowed faintly gold. And in that light, for the briefest heartbeat, I thought I saw the reflection of a river flowing beneath the waves. Calm, endless, waiting. The sea looked different when you were returning. Not wide and endless, but patient, like an old friend waiting to finish a long conversation. The day I boarded the ship, the fog was low over the harbor, curling around the masts like smoke from a forgotten prayer. May stood on the pier, her shawl drawn close against the wind. She didn't ask me to stay. She only said, "Write when you can." And I promised, though we both knew promises often drown before reaching shore. As the ship pulled away, the city shrank behind the mist. Its noise fading, its lights flickering like dying embers. I stood at the rail until the last glimpse of land disappeared, then closed my eyes and listened to the ocean breathe. For weeks, it was only water and sky. The horizon melted each evening into a single shade of blue. Days passed in a rhythm older than time itself. The creak of wood, the flap of sails, the sigh of waves brushing the hull. The air smelled of salt and iron. The sound of gulls followed us until even they gave up. At night, the deck was quiet. Men slept below, snoring softly, their dreams heavy with home or gold or both. I stayed above, staring at the stars. They looked the same as they had over the railroad camps. The same as over Shanghai before the world changed. It comforted me that some lights never move even when everything else does. Do you ever feel that the stars remember us, even when the world forgets our names? One evening, a storm found us. It rose without warning, turning the sky black in minutes. The wind howled like an animal unchained. Waves crashed over the deck, cold and heavy, and for a moment I thought the sea might keep me. But the storm passed, they always do, and morning came with the sky scrubbed clean, as if the ocean had forgiven itself for its rage. After that, the days grew softer. I spent hours by the railing, watching sunlight dance on the water. Sometimes I spoke aloud, though no one listened. I told the sea about the mountains, about O'Reilly, about May, about my mother's letter. Each word fell into the wind and vanished. Maybe that was enough. Maybe some stories are meant to dissolve into salt and air. A few of the crew were Chinese, sailors from Guangdong who had worked this route for years. At night, we shared tea brewed in dented tin cups. They asked about America, about the Golden Mountains. I told them what I could, that the gold was gone, that the mountains took more than they gave, that sometimes survival was the only treasure. They nodded as if they already knew. One of them, an older man with a scar down his cheek, told me quietly, "The sea takes from everyone. It remembers every face it swallows. But it also returns what we lose in time, not as we left it, but as we need it." I didn't understand then, but I carried his words like a charm. Do you believe the sea has a memory? That the waves which once bore our pain might one day bring it back as peace? On the 34th day I saw land. A faint outline first, then the gray shimmer of coastline. China. Oh. My heart felt both light and heavy, as if joy and sorrow had decided to share the same breath. We docked in Shanghai at dawn. The air smelled of rain and coal smoke. But beneath it all, I caught the faintest trace of jasmine, the scent of my childhood. I closed my eyes and let it fill me. The city looked nothing like the one I had left. Taller buildings now, more foreign signs, more soldiers on the streets. The world had not waited for me, but the river still ran. That was enough. I hired a small boat to take me upriver. The oars dipped slowly, quietly. The current was gentle, carrying us toward the morning light. I watched the ripples spread outward, each one a circle fading into the next, like the lives we touch without ever knowing. Do you think home is a place we return to, or a current that moves within us? guiding us back even when we've forgotten the way. The sky grew brighter. The wind smelled of earth again. And for the first time in many years, I began to believe that maybe the river did dream of me, just as I had dreamed of it. The boat reached the river mouth at dusk. The sky was copper, the water dark as ink. Along the banks, I saw the silhouettes of new warehouses, their roofs taller than the temples I remembered. The sound of machines echoed faintly, steady, metallic, unfeeling. It was the same river and yet not the same. The boatman, an old man with skin weathered by salt, looked at me and said, "You came back too late, friend. This river belongs to no one now." His voice held no malice, only truth. I nodded, watching the ripples stretch toward the fading sun. When we reached the dock, I stepped onto the same earth I had left years ago. But it no longer knew my footsteps. The streets were wider now, cobblestone instead of dirt. Foreign signs hung above shops that once sold incense and paper lanterns. Men in western suits hurried past, their shoes striking hard against the ground. And above them, flags that were not ours fluttered in the wind. Do you ever return somewhere only to realize you have become a visitor in your own story? I walked for hours through streets both familiar and strange. The smell of fried dough still lingered near the markets, but mingled now with the scent of coal smoke and perfume. Children shouted in accents I didn't recognize. A foreign tram rattled past, its bell cutting through the air like laughter that didn't belong. When I reached my old neighborhood, my legs trembled. The house was gone. In its place stood a warehouse of brick and iron. A British company sign nailed above the door. The riverbank where my mother used to wash clothes was paved with stones. The plum tree that once shaded our courtyard had been cut down. Only its roots remained, clutching the earth like fingers refusing to let go. I stood there a long time. The wind carried voices from the docks. Men bargaining, ships unloading, the low hum of engines. It felt like standing in the shadow of a dream. A woman passing by slowed when she saw me. Her face was kind, lined with years, her eyes soft. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked. "My family," I said. "They lived here once." She looked toward the river, then back at me. "There was an old woman here," she said. "She used to sit by the water every evening. People said she waited for someone. She passed some years ago." The words fell gently, but they hit like stone. I bowed my head, whispering thank you. When she left, I sat by the river where the roots still showed through the pavement. The water moved slowly, heavy with silt and memory. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small prayer note, the one that had crossed an ocean with me. Its edges were soft now, almost transparent. Do you believe places can grieve? That when a life ends beside them, something of it stays in the wind? In the way light touches the water? In the silence between waves? As night fell, the city across the river lit up. Electric lamps glowing in neat rows, reflections trembling on the dark surface. For the first time, I could see both centuries at once. The China I had left, and the China becoming something else entirely. Neither one fully alive nor dead. Just suspended, like breath before a word. I whispered my mother's name, and for a moment I thought I heard her answer. Not in words, but in the movement of the river itself. The current slowed, swirling gently near the roots of the plum tree. Petal drifted by. White, delicate, impossible. The tree was gone, yet here was its bloom. I took it carefully, holding it in my palm until it vanished with the wind. Maybe that was her way of saying goodbye. Or maybe the river, kind as ever, had found a way to dream for her. Do you think the past forgives us when we finally stop running from it? The moon rose pale over the harbor. I watched the light ripple across the water, touching the ruins, the ships, the city, all of it part of one long, slow story, still being written by unseen hands. And for the first time, I felt the river breathing with me again. Not as it once was, but as it would always be, endlessly returning, endlessly letting go. The years that followed were gentle, the way a lantern burns after its flame has softened. I stayed by the river, not out of duty, but because leaving no longer made sense. The world moved quickly around me, railways spreading, foreign ships multiplying, cities rising. But I had grown slow, like the water that once rushed and now only whispered. I rented a small room above a herbal shop. Each morning, I watched the merchants open their stalls, the same way I once watched the mountains wake. The scent of tea, salt, and rain mixed in the air. And every sound, footsteps, laughter, bells, carried the echo of something long ago. I spent my days teaching the neighbor's boy how to read. He was bright, restless, full of questions. Sometimes he asked about America, about the great iron road that cut across the continent. I told him it was built with hands that the world forgot, but that the earth still remembered. He asked if I missed it. I smiled. Not the place, I said. Only the people. At night, I would walk to the riverbank. The moonlight rippled across the surface like memory made visible. Sometimes I spoke to it, as if the river still carried voices from the other side of the world. Perhaps it did. Perhaps the sea had never truly let them go. Do you ever feel that silence can speak louder than memory? One winter evening, the first frost came early. The river gleamed like glass, and the streets were quiet under the thin veil of snow. May's last letter arrived that night. It came by a traveler who had passed through San Francisco, a stranger who carried stories in every pocket. Her handwriting was smaller now, but still careful. The tea stall is gone, she wrote, but the harbor still hums. I think of you often. If the wind ever carries my name across the water, listen. It means I remember. I read the letter by candlelight until the flame trembled out. Then I folded it beside my mother's. 2 pieces of paper that held more of my life than any photograph ever could. I placed them in a small wooden box and set it by the window where the river's reflection touched the wall. The next morning, I felt the years in my bones. The herbalist's wife brought me soup and said I looked pale. I told her I was only tired, but it was more than that. It was the kind of tired that comes when every journey is finally complete. That night, I walked once more to the river. The sky was clear, the air still. The moon hung low, the same pale coin I had seen above the Pacific so many years ago. I sat by the roots of the old plum tree, the same roots that had refused to die, still gripping the soil like memory itself. I closed my eyes and listened. The river moved slowly, its current soft, forgiving. The sound reminded me of breathing, not mine but the world's. Do you think the river knows when we are ready to rest? I thought of my mother, of O'Reilly, of the boy who sang in the snow, of May and her cracked teapot, of all the names that had drifted downstream into time. They no longer felt far away. They were here, in the water, in the wind, in the quiet rhythm of everything that continues. A small lantern floated past, released by someone upstream. Its light shimmered across the water, flickering like a heartbeat. I followed it with my eyes until it became one with the horizon. The air grew colder, but it no longer hurt. The river's voice softened until it sounded like sleep. And as I leaned back, I imagined it carrying me, past the docks, past the ocean, past the mountains and all the years in between, back to the place where the river begins. Do you believe that when we finally stop moving, the world keeps our stories flowing, turning them into quiet songs for those who come after? The last thing I remember was the scent of jasmine on the wind. And then, the river was all there was. And listen, gentle, home.